Hello, beautiful Bravehearts. We have got some bonus episodes coming for you. Enrollment for the Get Over Your Ex in 3 Months or Less program is opening April 6th. And I wanted to kick this week off with some amazing, badass Braveheart alumni. They actually came to the Braveheart Festival and spoke about their experience in 3 different topics. So I thought what it would be fun is if I shared that content, because the Braveheart Festival is inside of the Get Over Your Ex program. So if you want to watch those in full, you can get them inside of the program. But I wanted you to hear their experiences because they were so good. And they gave 3 different kind of miniature lessons around 3 different topics. We've got Rihanna talking about the relationship with yourself and how you can rebuild that after a breakup. We've got Sara, who's talking about the home buying process and how it felt impossible to her, and she eventually ended up being able to buy her dream home in less than 3 months, which is just so cool. And I want to say that, the housing market is different depending on where you live. And we just want to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily like legal advice in any way, shape, or form. It was just her experience. So just adding that disclaimer here. And then lastly, we also have Lisa, who is going to be talking about dating after 50 and getting really excited about your future without your ex in it. So 3 amazing, beautiful topics, 3 different lessons, all to help us kick off enrollment opening for the Get Over Your Ex in 3 Months or Less program. I am so excited to meet this next cohort, of Bravehearts who are joining us in the program. This is the place to not only get over your ex, but to also guarantee yourself a life that is bigger and better than the one that you had with your ex. I cannot wait to meet you guys. I am sending you all the love, and I will talk to you next time. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy.
Thank you, Dorothy. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have to say, it's been super inspiring to be sitting within this group again, within this container, and hearing everybody's personal stories. I miss the vibe. I miss the energy. It's just thank you everyone who has shared their stories so far. It's really great. I find it super inspiring. So I really appreciate everyone who shared today and yesterday for the sessions that I was able to join in on. I'm really excited to be here. And I will say I think we sort of touched on this morning some things I would probably talk about in my story, like the anger and resentment. When I came to Dorothy's program, actually, really, that was just my primary focus, was just to deal with the anger and resentment of my breakup, of my impending divorce. That really was my focus. And then, if I could feel better towards the end enough to see okay, what might come next, that was also kind of the cherry on the top if it worked out that way. But I really, looking back on it, it's still kind of mind-blowing to me, how much I was able to accomplish within that 3-month period. And yeah, it resulted in a tangible home for myself, but also just the change in how I had to, the change in my belief system, how I felt about myself, how I felt about my ex, all that really had to shift for me in order to make that possible. And so really that mental shift was kind of the most mind-blowing part for me to get to where I am now. And I will say coaching was a huge part of that. I feel whether it's, I do highly recommend getting coached one-on-one personally. For me, that was really helpful for Dorothy to kind of shake some long-standing beliefs I had about myself and what I could accomplish. But also, I will say that I found it really helpful just to even watch coaching calls, watching other members get coached. I would say 95% of the time I could find something in that coaching session that was really applicable to my situation as well. There's a lot of overlap. It's quite the shared human experience. Our stories may sound a little bit different, but there really is a lot of overlap. And I did really notice that watching others get coached. So yes. So I'm going to tell you my story today about how I accomplished my first impossible dream. of course, this is my experience, but I'm kind of hoping that like out of this story that maybe it'll sort of spark some ideas in yourselves as well, like what even just what an impossible dream might be for you. Just to sort of, even if it feels totally completely out of reach, what is that for you? That just seems completely impossible right now at this point in time. And, even if towards the end, starting to think about, well, is there anything I can do to like move in that direction? Which is kind of how it worked out for me. So whatever it may be for you. Um, yeah. So in terms of my story, you'll see me look down a few, probably periodically, because I also have some notes like Rihanna did to try and keep things on track. But feel free to like interject with questions if you have any. I'm also game to make this kind of a back and forth flowing conversation. So I'm also happy to do that as well. But yeah, so where I would like to start is sort of a little bit of background of how the streaming kind of even ended up on my radar in the first place. So the first, if I'm going to call it a chapter, the first chapter I like to call, or as Dorothy likes to call it, the portal of possibility. So my ex-partner and I, we've been together for 11 years, married for 2 of them, and we were both city kids from Vancouver who both moved to a town in northern BC, British Columbia, Canada, more of a rural community, to go to school there. And that's where we met. That's where we initially met. And at that point in time, having grown up in Vancouver, I just had this really long held belief that home ownership was never going to be on the table for me. And that's just because Vancouver, where I grew up, we kind of joke, half joke, it's like the land of $1 million homes. It's, at least in my lifetime, it's been a really expensive place to live. And so growing up, I just thought I was going to be a renter for the rest of my life, if I planned to be around the Lower Mainland. But it wasn't just Vancouver, other places too in Canada and BC were just becoming seemingly out of reach for a lot of us. So that had never really been on the table for me. But when I met my ex-partner, he really had this dream of buying a home on a piece of property and learning how to lead a more self-sufficient homesteading lifestyle where there was large gardens he could tend to, greenhouses. He would harvest it and can every fall, where we could have chickens and other animals if we so wished. So it's just kind of like that very quiet, tied to the property type of lifestyle. And he was really enamored it. Like his whole vision was like a little cabin in the woods. That was kind of his dream. And from day one of dating, he kind of talked about that quite a bit. And at the time, like, well, that sounds like a beautiful dream. I was focused on my studies, so I really didn't think too much of it, other than that's a beautiful dream. If we can make it happen, we should. And we did. So we were very fortunate that at the time, at one point, like my ex received a little bit of financial help from his grandmother to put a down payment on a piece of property. And the reason we could get into that property was because the house was a total shack. It was amazing. It was still standing. But he threw himself into renovating that property for 5 years. And it was his project, but I tried to help wherever I could. But he really spearheaded that. And it was just amazing seeing that transformation of the shack turned into this home, completely personalized to us. And I really started to get a sense of like, well, what it feels like to sort of like have a home for yourself. And there's a lot of experiences that I enjoyed. I really fell in love with chickens, and that also became kind of a side passion project that Dorothy had to like listen to me talk about a little bit much.
That
in our
was some of
coaching
my
sessions.
favorite conversations. We'd be doing so much coaching on chickens, and it was so great.
Yeah, they're kind of like, I don't have children, so they're kind of like my, like I have a fur baby too, cat, but the chickens were like my feathery children. So I really love my chickens. So there's really aspects of that lifestyle that really like appealed to me. And yeah, I can see there's other chicken lovers in the crowd here. You get it. You get it. You understand. They're just amazing. So that's kind of where it started. And then of course the breakup. So, as happens to a lot of couples and people, you go through some big life challenges. We did. We ended up having to take care with my father in the last couple of years of his life. He had stage 4 colon cancer. And while that was a beautiful, although harrowing experience, it kind of shook us up by the end of it. So we kind of both had, as we sort of sometimes joke, our midlife crisis a little bit earlier than normal. It just made us reevaluate what we wanted out of life. And in that conversation, we came to the realization that we kind of had a different vision for our life moving forward. I actually wanted to be tied less to the property because I needed a little bit more balance. I loved having a home, but I missed, like, between taking care of my dad and my graduate studies and trying to help him with the property, I was just overwhelmed by life and needed more space to do other things that really kind of rejuvenated me. And I was missing that piece. And he was struggling with some intimacy. Like, we've been also struggling with intimacy issues, and this is something I had to kind of figure myself for later on in the program. But our marriage kind of struggled with that a little bit, and he had kind of gotten to the place where he wanted something different in a relationship. Like, he came forward and honestly said, you know what, I don't know if monogamy is for me anymore. And so it's resulted in, we decided to do a trial separation. It was only supposed to be 1 month long, where we would take some space apart, think about things, and then come back. The plan was to come back to the table, we'd have lunch together, and just decide how we wanted to move forward. And at the time, we decided that I would be the one to move out because it was gardening season, and he was really the mastermind of the garden. And so we didn't want to pull him away from the property. It made sense for me to sort of be the one to leave. So I went to go live in an Airbnb for a month, and we tried to figure some things out. And at first it was really friendly. So it like, that conversation came from a very amicable place. But then what happened was that at the end of the month, unfortunately, I had come to the conclusion that I wanted to try and work on things. So for me, I felt like the lifestyle piece could be fixed, and that we could find a way to find more balance in our lives and kind of revive what we had before in our relationship. Unfortunately, he had come to the conclusion that he was ready to move on. He was ready to see other people and explore being with other people. And he was just very honest about that. So that sent me into an emotional tailspin of anger and resentment. And the next following months, it would just become a cloud that would hang over everything I would do. There was like a rational voice inside my head that was like, well, he's being honest with you at least. But like, it was just hard in the thick of it. It was just hard not to feel so rejected. And especially after everything we had been through together, I was really struggling that had to be sort of the end to our story, that he would rather be with other people than work on our relationship. And that was the story, it's the thought that kept circulating in my head that just created this cloud smothering every other part of my life. So I came to Dorothy's program, I think I was about 7 months into my separation at that point, found her program through the podcast, and her podcast sort of would keep me afloat many of my days. And by that point in time, we were pretty much pushing divorce papers and having lawyers like split up our assets for us. So it was pretty final at that point in time that we were parting ways. But I was really scared about being stuck in the anger resentment for a really long period of time. I really didn't want it to be slowing me down from some other big goals that I wanted to accomplish in life, with my career, with other relationships. It felt like it was really kind of smothering me and slowing me down. So that's how I came to Dorothy's program. And the next chapter I like to kind of refer to is, and I think someone's also talked about it and framed it like this, maybe it was Dorothy herself, coming back to yourself. That's what I would call that next chapter. Like, it was really important for me personally to go through pillar 1, like learning how to feel your emotions. It sounds, to me at the time, it sounded kind of silly. Like, I know how to feel an emotion, but actually, when you go through different types of exercises that Dorothy has in her program, you realize you're not maybe as used to, or at least I wasn't as used to like sitting through it as good as I thought I was. And so learning how to allow them and so that I could properly process them, that was really important for me to work through that first phase of anger and resentment. Of course, pillar two, like Rihanna talked about this morning, rebuilding your sense of self and your confidence. I think a lot of us, it seems like a lot of us can relate to, when you're in a relationship, you kind of, um, you kind of absorb the other person in their life to a certain extent, or at least there's a lot of us that do. And I was definitely one of those people. Um, so I really had to like sit down and think about who I was outside of that relationship. We've been pretty much attached to the hip for 11 years. We've been chasing his goals and dreams. And like I said, they weren't all bad. Like I had some good experiences with that, but I really had to think about what does that mean for what do I actually want? Who am I and what do I actually want without any kind of outside interference? So that was really an important component. Of course, forgiving my ex and after that myself, that kind of popped up as well. But like Dorothy has lots of exercises in her programs that will sort of help you like find closure, because you talked about. That was really important to me. And one of the exercises we did for that is learning how to, or deciding, figuring out how to retell the story. That was helpful for me to be able to shift. So when I came to the program, I think I mentioned that story I had was that he was basically a jerk for wanting to be with other people instead of working on our marriage. It didn't feel very good. It wasn't working for me. Work together actually at the same company still, so that it was just making me miserable at work. It wasn't helping. So I had to shift that. And so with the retelling of the story, Dorothy challenged us to say, well, how about first tell the story the way you're telling it now, just to kind of see how that plays out. Retold that story in detail. And then the second component is the challenge is to, okay, try telling the story from his point of view. And that, I probably had to pour over that exercise for a couple days. Of course, it's like, I mean, you're still kind of trying to get, it's still an estimation. I'll never truly know like what it was like from his perspective, but just even having to sit in his shoes and think, okay, given what I know, how might have this been hard for him? And that just helped create help foster a little feeling of compassion. And that was enough to sort of help move the needle. And okay, maybe there isn't a bad guy and a good guy in this breakup. Maybe there was just two human beings who were really struggling to figure out what they want out of life and decided that their existing relationship had come to a natural conclusion. And ultimately that helped feed the third story, which is pretty much just that, like deciding how you want to retell it in a way that's still authentic. It's still authentic to your experience, but also is more empowering. It helps you, it feels better in the body and helps you move forward in a way that motivates you rather than, drags you down. So that was a really important piece. Then, of course, it's not just about getting over your ex. Like a large part of Dorothy's program is about, okay, what do you want out of life? Like part of moving through your breakup is figuring out what is that bigger and better life that you want for yourself. Dream big. And at that point in time, I was back in the rental market. We had agreed for reasons that because that the house was his dream, that he would get to keep it and he would buy me out. And the legal papers that we had in place, separation papers, stated that he had a year to buy me out. And at the time we were okay with those reasons, gave him more leeway. But I was being back in the rental market was a little bit of a shock to my system. I will say that I feel pretty fortunate that my rental situation overall was pretty good. But going back into the market where I live now, at the time, it was very eye-opening in terms of, there was more of a housing shortage, so there was fewer places for rent, not very many places that would rent if you had a pet, so I had to leave my cat behind. Definitely couldn't bring my chickens, unfortunately. Um, so it was like an adjustment in lifestyle that way. And it was also a far more competitive market. And I just missed having a home that was my own. So having to restart my life in that way, as I'm sure probably a lot of people who are going through divorce or separation can relate to, it really actually kind of took me by surprise, whether that sounds silly. I was a pretty independent person before I met my ex-partner, but having to restart my life after throwing myself into renovating what I thought was going to be our dream home, it was very jarring for me. And so my first impossible goal, as Dorothy was challenging us to dream about what we wanted our life to look like next, was how could I make a home for myself that was going to make sense for the life I wanted next? And at the time, that felt really impossible because I had some beliefs around three core things. And they're going to sound quite reasonable. I think they would sound, anyone who's, kind of trying to achieve something kind of tangible like buying a house would probably agree that these are obstacles or challenges to be concerned about. But the first one for me was, of course, financial limitations. So thankfully, where I lived at that point in time, that rural town, I live in Prince George, BC, a little more affordable than Vancouver, a lot more affordable than Vancouver, but houses have gone up quite a bit since when I had first bought a house with my ex. So the housing prices had risen. At that point in time, the oh my goodness, the real estate market was changing. Like the rates were starting to increase at that point in time. They weren't quite as high now, but they were starting to climb at that point. So I had concerns around that. And also just around owning a home on a single income. It felt really doable with two incomes. And I was worried that if it would significantly limit me to own a home with only one income. The second big obstacle to it was timing. And this was a bit of an unusual one, kind of for my circumstance, but the timing was actually really important to me. So ideally, I wanted to be in the market before the year was up. And I had some reasons for that at the time. For my work, I'm on the road traveling quite a bit during the spring and summer months. So I'm quite limited to what times of the year I can actually sort of be at home in town, sort of on the ground, like trying to catch up on life things. So being able to search for a home and go through that process, I felt like I was limited to a narrow window because of my work. But I also wanted to be in a home before the end of the year because, again, of concerns about rising interest rates. And my ex-partner was going to actually leave for the summer, and I wanted to be able to have a place where I could have my cat, host family members if they came to town. I had a family member who was going to come to town for a year for a short-term work contract. So all these things were happening in my life where I was like, you know what, like, I'm going to try this. It would be great to be able to do it before the end of the year. And I had friends who were like, that's kind of crazy. You're just getting divorced. You're not even fully divorced yet. Like, maybe pump the brakes. And to be fair, like, I probably would have said the same thing to another friend who was going through something very similar. So during my process, I did, as a disclaimer, have to work on attachment issues around that timing piece in order to also make it work. So there was a point in time where I had to work with Dorothy to be like, okay, even if it doesn't happen in the time frame I want, I will still find a way to make it happen, to have all these things that I want at the end of the day. So that was something I had to work on as well. There are several kind of layers to that. The other obstacle to being able to do it in the time frame I wanted was just the way that my divorce was kind of playing out. So in order for me to get pre-approved for a mortgage, I had to get my name removed off the house title of the previous property I owned with my ex. And in order for them to do that, he had to like buy me out. But we gave him a year to do that. So that was kind of in conflict with this time frame that I had mentally decided would be the ideal time frame to be able to get into the housing market. And then the third big obstacle for me was actually maintenance. So how lacking self-confidence around being able to take care of a home all on my own and even reno it, would be like involved in rental projects. After seeing my ex like throw himself into the process, I had concerns that I wouldn't be able, wouldn't have the same skill set to be able to maintain the home in the same way that he had been able to. So those are some of my big challenges, and I'm sure like everyone has their own stories and belief systems around their impossible goals. Of course, that's why we put impossible at the beginning of the goal. So in order to move past those, I had to start shifting my thoughts around those like three primary areas, those three obstacles that I had. Part of that was developing neutral thoughts around it. So financial limitations. It had like a thought around that, like sort of like a bridge thought to sort of make it feasible, so that to at least convince myself that it was worth trying for. Was something as simple as I will learn how to make enough money to be able to afford this home. Even if it's like a side hustle, whatever it is, I will find a way to be able to afford this home. Or I'm learning how to, like I think Dorothy mentioned that too as a bridge thought, like I'm going to learn how to be able to afford this home. Fine, or I will find ways. So, and same thing with the maintenance, that very much apply. Like I will learn and develop the skill set required to be able to take care of this home. So trying to basically just nudge the obstacle just a little bit out of the way, so there's like a sliver of hope that would propel me into actually doing the action required to move myself in that direction. The other thing that helped, that kind of fits into the thought shifting work, is looking for evidence that I had done hard things before. So I think most of us can look back on our history, but look back on our life and either think about something that was either a done deal for us, that was like, okay, this something that might have been considered hard for someone else, but you went ahead and did it, and you just thought when you did it, it would be a done deal. And so looking at that and reminding yourself, what were your thoughts around being able to get that particular goal done, that made it seem easier for you, and sort of trying to adopt those thoughts. So for me, I look back, and for me it was school. So school wasn't easy for me, but I had thoughts around, this is going to benefit my life. I'm just going to find a way to get my degree and do it. So sort of using that as like, I can do hard things. I've done hard things before. I will find solutions to these hard things, to complete these hard things. So that was really important to finding creative solutions, because like once I'd sort of dealt with or processed the majority of my negative emotions around my breakup, learned to forgive my ex and myself, and started to nudge my old beliefs about what was possible for homeownership for me, and like kind of nudge them away from being an impossible thing, like or a task or an obstacle that makes it impossible for me. I had more space to think about creative solutions. So once I started thinking like, this might be possible for me, I could start creating a list of, okay, well, what's required for home ownership? You know, you got to talk to the bank, ideally get a real estate agent, you know, ideally have a down payment, do all the pre-approval, start looking online to see what you like and what's available. And so I created that list and then just started kind of picking away at things, thinking, okay, well, I'm moving towards it. Whatever happens, I'm just kind of now moving towards it. And so with the idea that this could be possible, it allowed me to sort of start thinking a little bit more outside the box. So for my scenario, it actually started with a discussion with my ex. So I had a very vulnerable conversation with him one day, just letting him know that, you know, home ownership was actually something that I decided was really important to me. And I would really like to get into the market before it seems unfeasible to me. Again, another belief system, but at the time, that's kind of how I was still kind of struggling with that. And so I asked him, like, if there's any way at all that you could buy me out of the other house before the year's up, that would be amazing. And I didn't actually think anything was going to come out of that. It really was more just an honest conversation at the time, just to like plant the seed in his head that, you know, I did have other goals I wanted to accomplish. So not to totally sit on his laurels. But it turns out he actually took that conversation to heart. And he went to his family, who I also had a good relationship with and maintained a good relationship with during our breakup. And his family helped him out in buying me out much sooner so that they could start to remove the house title from my name from the house title of the previous property and get that all in motion, basically wrap up the separation agreement, and so that we can get the ball rolling. So that was amazing. That was beautiful. I was shocked when he just showed up at my door one day. Didn't promise me anything, but just showed up at my door one day a few weeks later with the check in hand. It was absolutely mind-blowing to me. But so that was like the first big check mark. So I technically had a down payment, and now the lawyers are working on removing my name. But the lawyers are like, don't get your hopes up yet, because this is going to take a few months to process. Which reasonable, you know, like that's what they're used to. It takes time for legal paperwork to go through, understandable. But I started thinking like, well, is there any way around this so that I could sort of get my name removed and get basically a mortgage pre-approval sooner so I could start looking before work ramped up. And I just went to the bank that was looking at all that paperwork, the bank that was going to be processing it for my ex and myself. And I asked them, I was like, well, since you're the ones looking at this paperwork, you know it's coming down the pipe. How do you feel about granting me like a special authorization for a mortgage pre-approval? And they agreed. They agreed to it because they wanted my mortgage. Like, yeah, if you keep your mortgage with us, we'll do that for you. So, check. So just even getting to that stage was absolutely amazing to me. So, but you know, my work was starting to ramp up still. So I was still having to work on attachment issues around, you know, my ideal time frame. So I was trying to keep that in mind, but I was just excited at that point to start hitting the ground and looking with my real estate agent. And I have to say that was quite the amazing experience because, you know, I didn't really realize like how different my tastes actually were from my ex's when it came to like house ownership or a home. Not that I love the place we built together. It was beautiful, but it was definitely just sort of like his vision. And the houses I started seeing, I'm like, they were like kind of old 1950s retro character homes that had a little bit of personality, hardwood floors, and just a little bit. I was attracted to a slightly different style. So that was really kind of like a learning. It was like self-exploration for me, getting to see like what space actually feels like home to me without having to like think about the other person, which, hey, nothing wrong with compromise. I'm all for it in a good relationship, but it was pretty exciting for me at that point in time to actually consider that part of my life for myself specifically. And we ended up looking at a house one day, my real estate agent and I, that was like 15 minutes walking distance from my office. It was in the neighborhood I had actually lived in during my separation, my trial separation, that I kind of fall in love with. It was near the park, near the farmer's market, near my yoga studio, just a really excellent, accessible location. And it wasn't even any pictures for it at the time when it popped up on online, but it had like so many check marks and the location was amazing that my real estate agent and I ran to go see it. And it was like, it was that kind of scenario where you kind of walk in and you're like, yeah, I think this is the house. And it even had a secondary suite so that something I could rent out, to sort of help with the mortgage. So that was another piece of it. It helped me out financially. It was in the price range too, and that was because there were it did need a little bit of work, but it was nothing that I didn't think I could handle. I definitely had some thoughts around it, but the bones of the house were good. The rest of the work, I thought I can manage this over time. I can manage this. So we put in an offer, and again, I had to work on attachment issues because hot market at the time, the sellers were ready to accept an offer within 48 hours because there was 10 other bidders on the place. And when I found out 24 hours later there's 10 other bidders, I thought, oh, I don't know if I can compete. There's no way. It's probably not going to be the house. But I had a really savvy real estate agent, and she did some digging, asked around, and found out that the sellers were really, they really wanted a closing date of their choosing. The closing date really mattered to them because of their whatever scenario they were in at the time. And so we basically adjusted my bid to say, closing date of your choice, whatever you want, well, I'll make it work. And that was just enough to tip it into my favor. And I got the house. And I've been living here now. I bought it last April, and I love it. I love it so much. And since then, in terms of like building up confidence, because hey, I was still terrified walking into the front door thinking, how am I going to take care of a house on my own? I still had to kind of work on that piece. But just to provide some context, like the first thing I had to do was a small task when I moved in. It was I have to recaulk the shower and the bathtub. It just had to be redone. And my brother was moving in with me for a short-term contract, and so I wanted to have that bathroom ready to go and properly caulked. And I remember avoiding it for weeks because I was thinking, I'm gonna fuck it up. It's not gonna be a straight line. I'm not gonna be able to do it well. Did it, stared at that caulking for the next 3 days, going, yes, I can do it. And then since that point in time, I have like renovated a secondary suite. So I've refinished cabinets, installed hardware, helped put down flooring. My skill set has just like, since that point in time. I kind of laugh now thinking that in the short period of time I've been in that house, I went from being scared of caulking a bathtub to what I can do at this point in time. So it's learnable, it's doable. It really made me realize that a lot of it is just learning how to sort of get out of your own way a little bit. So that is my story. And I look forward to hearing any of your thoughts.
Sara, I have to say really quickly that you are the reason I have the house that I have now, that I bought.
Really?
Yes. Like going into the process of home buying, I was like petrified, and I'm like, should I buy? Maybe I should just rent. I had all the same like hangups that you did. And I was like, I finally sat down and had like a come to Jesus moment with myself. And I was like, Dorothy, your brave hearts buy their dream homes in 3 months or less. Like, if they can do it, you can do it. Like, remember Sara? And like, we walked through your whole thing. I went through all of your thought work. I went and watched all of your coaching calls, me coaching you on them, and took that for myself. And I was like, I need this. And I went through all of the same stuff. So I think it's really awesome that happened. I think it's just so wild, but you have no idea how much it means to me that you came in and shared this story with now 50, 60 people. And I'm sure more people will watch the recording, but I don't think you understand how many lives are going to change by saying that was possible for you. Because I think that a lot of us, at least as women, I can't really speak for men, but I think for a lot of women, it is an intimidating thing to own a home on your own um, if you don't have someone to look up to or someone who's shown you that that's possible. So thank you.
I'm really glad I was inspired, and I'm so excited that you got your dream home.
I'm so
That's
excited too.
amazing.
So wild.
Yeah, and it's been really good. Like, I feel like it's been a good confidence booster too. So now I'm thinking about other areas of my life, and it just feels like it snowballs. Like you do one big dream, and it's like, all right, okay, what next? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and even like it might seem small, but it just, yeah, I encourage you to make it as big as possible because I think you can be surprised. I really surprised myself by what was possible. Yeah, yeah, it was just amazing. I'm still kind of floored to this day. So I hope all of you too, like, come up with something that you're kind of scared to chase, and then think about like maybe what you can do to sort of move forward in that direction because you might surprise yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love surprising myself. I think that's the funnest part. But thank you so much, Sara. I really appreciate it. Love your story. Love everything you provided. Seriously. And it's just so great to see you too, by the way. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.